He, a cynical and detached magnate blinded by past disillusionments, saw his employees as mere resources. She, his discreet and unassuming assistant with a pure soul and inexperienced in matters of the heart. In a moment of his vulnerability, she demonstrates unexpected kindness and insight. Victor observes her, not as an employee, but as a woman. He perceives the dignity behind her reserved demeanor, the purity in her eyes, and the absence of pretense. Her innocence captivates him in a way he's never felt before. Against his will, the millionaire CEO falls for her heart, realizing that her true beauty and worth lie in the essence of her soul. Watch this story to the end. You'll be surprised by it. If you like love stories and romance, subscribe to this channel, leave your comment. We post videos like this every day. Continuing. The elevator in the Caldwell Financial Tower ascended silently through the 60 floors, carrying Isabella "Izzy" Fiorello to another workday that began before sunrise. She adjusted the faux leather portfolio on her lap, checked for the third time that the documents were organized, and took a deep breath, trying to calm the nerves that always accompanied her in that environment of glass and steel. At 26, Izzy had learned to be invisible. It was a skill she had developed out of necessity, first in college where she studied on a full scholarship while her classmates talked about trips and imported cars, then in the corporate world, where her humble background made her feel constantly out of place. Her brown hair was always pulled back in a discreet bun. Her clothes, although impeccable, came from department stores, and her voice rarely rose above a respectful and professional tone. The two-bedroom apartment in Queens she shared with her mother, Mrs. Fiorello, cost almost half of her salary. Her mother's diabetes had worsened in recent months, and private medical appointments consumed the remainder of the family income. Izzy knew every penny that came in and out of the house, every overdue bill, every sacrifice needed to keep the family's dignity intact. 40 floors above, Victor Caldwell finished his second cup of espresso before 7 in the morning. His office occupied the entire top floor of the building, with a panoramic view of the New York skyline that was worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime. The walls were decorated with paintings by renowned artists and international awards that attested to his success in global financial markets. At 39, Victor had built an empire that spanned 3 continents. The son of Italian immigrants who arrived in America with only the dream of prospering, he had transformed his father's small brokerage firm into one of the largest financial institutions in the United States. But success had taken its toll. 3 failed relationships, all with women who saw in him only wealth and status, had hardened his heart. The final betrayal by his ex-fiancée, Serena Vanderbilt, who left him at the altar for a younger French heir, definitively sealed his decision to keep emotional distance from everyone. Victor saw his employees as pieces on a complex chessboard. Efficiency was all that mattered. Feelings were luxuries that men like him could not afford. Izzy arrived on the 50th floor at 7 o'clock sharp, as always. Her desk was in the anteroom of Victor's office, a position that kept her close enough to meet his needs, but far enough away to remain unnoticed. She organized the day's schedule, checked urgent emails, and prepared the reports he would review at the first meeting. It was like this every day for 2 years. She took care of the details that kept his professional life running perfectly, and he barely registered her presence. A polite "good morning," precise instructions, and no conversation that was not strictly necessary. For Victor, Izzy was simply the efficient assistant. But that Tuesday morning, everything changed. Victor was reviewing the merger contracts with the Argentinian bank when he felt a sharp pain in his chest. The pressure intensified, radiating down his left arm. The world began to spin, and he grabbed the desk, trying to control his breathing, which had become difficult and irregular. Izzy was organizing files when she heard a dull thud coming from the office. Something had fallen. She hesitated for a moment. Victor hated being interrupted, but a stronger instinct made her get up and knock on the door. "Mr. Caldwell? Is everything all right?" Silence. She carefully opened the door and found Victor leaning on the desk, his face pale and beads of sweat on his forehead. Without thinking twice, Izzy rushed to him. "You're not feeling well? I'll call an ambulance." "No," Victor managed to say, his voice hoarse. "It's nothing. I just need—" But his legs buckled, and he would have fallen if Izzy hadn't supported him with a strength surprising for her fragile appearance. She helped him sit in the armchair, loosened his tie, and ran to the mini-fridge to get water. "Drink slowly," she said, holding the glass in her trembling hands. "Breathe with me. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale." For 10 minutes, that seemed like an eternity. Izzy remained beside Victor, monitoring his breathing, checking his pulse with the calmness of someone who had cared for someone sick before. She showed no panic, asked no unnecessary questions, just offered a calm and safe presence. When the color finally returned to his face, Victor looked up and, for the first time in 2 years, really looked at Isabella "Izzy" Fiorello. Documents that needed to be reviewed personally, meetings that required her presence for detailed notes, reports that suddenly became urgent. Each interaction was a silent torture. He studied her serene face, the way she bit her lower lip when she concentrated, the way her eyes lit up when she explained an important detail. Izzy, in turn, felt increasingly confused and intimidated by the unusual attention. She noticed that Victor was watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, noticed how he took longer to dismiss her after a task was completed, how his voice had become less cold, less impersonal. But it was impossible, she thought. Men like Victor Caldwell weren't interested in women like her. The difference between their worlds was an insurmountable chasm. Victor frequented charity galas where one dress cost more than Izzy's annual salary. He dined at restaurants where you had to make reservations months in advance, while she brought a packed lunch to work to save money. The women who appeared in the society pages beside him were models, heiresses, powerful executives, all with postgraduate degrees from overseas, fluency in 3 languages, and a confidence that Izzy would never possess. And there was the hierarchical difference, perhaps even more significant than the social one. She was his employee, dependent on her job to support her mother and pay the medical bills that kept coming. A relationship between them would be not only inappropriate, but potentially destructive to her career. The company gossips already whispered about any employee who spent more than 5 minutes in the CEO's office. The tension reached its peak on a rainy Thursday in April. Victor was reviewing the proposed acquisition of a fintech company when he noticed a significant error in the financial calculations. It was the kind of mistake that could cost millions and compromise his reputation in the market. His first reaction was to immediately summon the CFO, but something made him hesitate. "Izzy," he called her on the intercom, for the first time using her name instead of Ms. Fiorello. She entered the office with a folder of documents, but Victor wasn't interested in papers at that moment. For the first time, he really paid attention to the woman in front of him. The brown hair with golden highlights that she hid in a severe bun, the almond-shaped eyes that avoided his with modesty, the fair skin that blushed easily. There was a quiet beauty there, a soft femininity that contrasted with the calculating aggressiveness of the women in his social circle. "Sit down," he said, indicating the armchair in front of his desk. "Please." Izzy obeyed, clearly uncomfortable with the unusual formality. Victor tried to keep his voice professional, but his words came out gentler than he intended. "How long have you worked here?" 2.5 years, sir." "And before that?" Izzy hesitated, surprised by the personal question. "I worked as a secretary in some smaller companies, and I took business administration classes at night." "Do you have family?" "My mother," she replied, her voice almost a whisper. "She's sick." Something in her resigned tone touched Victor in an unexpected way. He recognized the premature responsibility, the burden of caring for a loved one. His own mother had battled cancer before she died, and he remembered the feeling of helplessness in the face of the disease. "It's hard," he said more to himself than to her. "Yes." Izzy raised her eyes for the first time, and Victor saw there a silent strength that he did not expect. "But it's a privilege to be able to take care of her." The sincerity of those words struck him like lightning. When was the last time someone talked about privilege without referring to money or status? When was the last time he had met someone who saw sacrifice as an honor? Victor got up and walked to the window, trying to process the conflicting feelings she aroused. Desire, protection, curiosity, a strange need to get to know her better. It was dangerous, he knew. It was inappropriate and reckless, and completely against all the principles that had protected him from more disappointments. "Izzy," he said, without turning around. "Yes, sir? Thank you for what you did last week. No one had..." He couldn't finish the sentence. How to explain that? No one had shown genuine care for him in years. How to admit that her selfless kindness had shaken him deeply? "It was nothing, Mr. Caldwell," she replied, getting up to leave. Anyone would do the same. But they both knew it wasn't true. In his world, people calculated every gesture, every word, every demonstration of affection. Her spontaneity was as rare as it was precious. Izzy was already at the door when the intercom rang urgently. The receptionist's voice sounded alarmed. "Mr. Caldwell, there's a team of IRS auditors in the lobby. They want to come up right now for an unscheduled audit. They say it's about irregularities in the company's tax returns for the last 3 years." The IRS audit lasted 3 intense days that transformed the 50th floor of the Caldwell Financial Tower into a silent battlefield. Documents were turned inside out, computers were sealed, and an atmosphere of tension hung over all the employees. Victor knew his company was clean. He personally oversaw all tax operations, but he also knew the destructive power of a prolonged investigation on investor confidence. It was during this crisis that the dynamic between him and Izzy changed definitively. On the morning of the second day of the audit, Victor arrived at the office to find 3 auditors installed in his conference room, demanding access to specific files dating back 5 years. The problem was that many of these documents were in a complex physical filing system, organized according to a logic that only Izzy completely mastered. The previous assistant had created her own method, and when she left the company, Izzy spent months deciphering and reorganizing everything. "I need you to stay with me today," Victor said to her, for the first time completely abandoning formality. "You're the only one who understands where these old files are." Izzy nodded, feeling a strange mixture of pride and nervousness. For the first time, she was indispensable, not just useful. They spent the whole day side by side, she guiding him through stacks of documents, explaining the logic behind each category, each code, each cross-reference system. Victor discovered that she had created a more efficient organizational method than any system he knew, an impressive combination of creativity and pragmatism. "How did you learn to do this?" he asked, genuinely impressed, as she located in seconds a contract the auditors had been searching for hours. "Necessity," Izzy replied with a shy smile. "When I got here, I inherited a complete mess. I had to create my own system or go crazy." "Did you study archival science, document management?" "No," she blushed slightly. "I learned it myself. I researched, read books, tested different methods until I found what worked." Victor watched her with growing admiration. She had transformed chaos into order, using only intelligence and determination. How many other skills did she possess that he had never noticed? When the third day of the audit came to an end with the company completely cleared, Victor felt a deep relief, but also a strange melancholy. The crisis was over, and with it, the justification for spending so much time close to Izzy. It was that afternoon, while they were organizing the last documents, that she asked a question that caught him off guard. "Why did you choose finance?" "Gee," she inquired, carefully folding the papers. "I mean, did you always want to be a businessman?" Victor stopped what he was doing. It was a simple question, but the answer was more complex than he had imagined. "Actually," he said slowly, "I wanted to be an architect." Izzy raised her eyes, surprised. "An architect? When I was a kid, I spent hours drawing buildings, bridges, houses. I dreamed of building things that would last forever, that would be beautiful and functional at the same time." There was a vulnerability in his voice that she had never heard before. Victor continued, as if the words were coming out of their own accord. "My father was an Italian immigrant who built the company from scratch. When he died, I was 22 and had just graduated in architecture. But my mother was sick. The company was going through difficulties, and there were employees who depended on their jobs. I had a choice: follow my dream or save my father's legacy. And you chose to save the company," Izzy said softly. "I chose responsibility. But sometimes I wonder..." He paused, looking out the window. "Sometimes I wonder who I would be if I'd had the courage to follow another path." The silence stretched between them, filled with a new and frightening intimacy. Izzy felt that Victor had just shown her a part of his soul that he kept hidden from the world. "Do you still draw?" she asked gently. Victor hesitated, then opened the drawer of his desk. From inside, he took out a sketchbook, the pages yellowed with time. The first pages showed elaborate designs of buildings and houses, but as the pages progressed, the drawings became more sparse until the last pages were completely blank. "I stopped drawing the day I signed my first big financial contract," he said. "It was as if a door closed forever." Izzy leafed through the notebook, with reverence, studying each stroke, each carefully thought-out detail. The drawings were beautiful, full of life and creativity. She could see the young dreamer that Victor had been, before responsibilities and disillusionments transformed him into the cold and distant man the world knew. "These are beautiful," she said sincerely. "You had a lot of talent." "Talent never used," he replied with a bitterness that surprised her. "That's not true." Izzy closed the notebook and looked him directly in the eye. "You built a company, created jobs, helped people realize their financial dreams. Maybe it's not architecture, but it's still construction. It's still creation." Victor stared at her in silence, touched by her perspective. No one had ever described his work that way. For him, business was just numbers, strategies, power games. But in Izzy's soft voice, it sounded like something nobler. "And you?" he asked impulsively. "Did you always want to be a personal assistant?" Izzy laughed softly, a musical sound that he realized he loved to hear. "Not exactly. She hesitated as if she were revealing a secret. "I always wanted to be a writer." "A writer?" "I wrote short stories, poems, little narratives. I even won some contests in college. But when my mother got sick, I needed a stable job with health insurance. Literature doesn't pay medical bills." The irony of the situation struck them simultaneously. Two people who had abandoned their artistic dreams in the name of responsibility and survival. "Do you still write?" Victor asked, echoing her question. "Sometimes," Izzy admitted. "Late at night, when my mother is sleeping and the house is quiet. But they are just fantasies. Escapism." Victor felt a sudden and intense need to read everything she had written, to know the world she created when no one was looking. But before he could ask, The intercom interrupted the moment with the urgent voice of the receptionist. "Mr. Caldwell, Ms. Serena Vanderbilt is here. She says she needs to speak with you urgently. She's saying it's about something that could destroy your reputation if it's not resolved today." Serena Vanderbilt's name fell upon the office like a silent bomb. Victor felt his entire body stiffen, and Izzy immediately noticed the radical change in his posture. The man who moments before was sharing his lost dreams had transformed, again into the impenetrable fortress she knew. "Tell her I'm in a meeting," Victor said, his voice icy. "Sir, she says she won't leave until she speaks with you, and there's a man with her who appears to be a lawyer." Victor closed his eyes for a moment, processing the situation. Serena Vanderbilt, his ex-fiancée, the woman who had left him at the altar 3 years ago for a younger French heir, was here with a lawyer. This couldn't mean anything good. "Let her come up," he said finally. Izzy got up to leave, but Victor stopped her with a gesture. "Stay," he asked, and there was something in his voice that made her obey immediately. "Please." She didn't understand why her presence was necessary, but something in his tone, a vulnerability disguised as command, made her sit down again. Victor walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back, preparing for the confrontation. Serena Vanderbilt entered the office like a perfumed storm. At 35, she was exactly the type of woman that high society admired, platinum blonde, thin, dressed in a Chanel suit that cost more than Izzy's annual salary. Her blue eyes swept the room until they landed on the discreet figure of the assistant. "Victor, darling," she said with the melodious voice that he had once found enchanting, "I see you still maintain dedicated employees." The disdainful tone with which she pronounced employees made Victor's blood boil, but he maintained his composure. "Serena," he replied coldly, "what do you want?" Straight to the point as always, she laughed, a crystalline and false sound. "I like that about you. Mr. Caldwell," she addressed the man accompanying her, "can you explain the situation?" The lawyer, a corpulent, middle-aged man, opened a folder and removed a series of photographs. Izzy couldn't see the content, but she saw Victor pale when he examined them. "These photos were taken 4 years ago during our association," Serena said with a cruel smile. "You remember that weekend in the Hamptons on Daddy's yacht when we discussed those offshore investments you were planning?" Victor took the photographs, and Izzy saw his hands tremble slightly. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she realized it was something serious, something that threatened to destroy everything Victor had worked for. "These investments were completely legal," Victor said, his voice tense. "They were," Serena agreed. "But you know how these things can be misinterpreted, especially when contextualized with intimate conversations between fiancés discussing creative ways of tax optimization." "You're blackmailing me," Victor said bluntly. "What an ugly word." Serena made a false grimace. "I prefer to think of it as a mutual business opportunity. You see, my marriage to Pierre didn't go as planned. He proved to be less generous than expected, and I need resources to maintain my lifestyle." "How much?" "10 million, she said casually, as if asking for a glass of water. "And some favors. Investments in some companies that I'm advising." The silence in the office was deafening. Izzy felt like an intruder in that situation, but something prevented her from leaving. Maybe it was Victor's expression, a mixture of anger and vulnerability that she had never seen before. "And if I refuse," Victor asked, "then these photos and recordings," Serena nodded to the lawyer, who showed a small digital recorder, "will be delivered to the IRS, the SEC, and of course, the press." Imagine the headlines: "Billionaire CEO involved in tax evasion scheme. Even if you are acquitted later, your reputation will be ruined. Your investors will flee like rats from a sinking ship." Victor closed his eyes, processing the magnitude of the threat. Serena knew his weaknesses better than anyone. She had been by his side during the moments of greatest growth of the company, had heard his strategies, his plans, his concerns. And now she was using all this against him. "You have 48 hours to decide," Serena said, heading to the door. "Oh, and Victor, if you try anything, let's say ungentlemanly, remember that I have copies of everything in safe places." She stopped at the door and looked directly at Izzy for the first time. "And you, dear," she said with a venomous smile, "I hope you understand that conversations overheard by chance sometimes leak. It would be a pity if your position here became complicated." The veiled threat made Izzy swallow hard, but she kept her gaze steady. There was something in Serena's predatory attitude that awakened in her a courage she didn't know she possessed. After Serena and the lawyer left, Victor remained motionless in front of the window, his hands resting on the glass. Izzy could see the tension in his shoulders, the internal struggle he was waging. "Mr. Caldwell," she said softly, Can I help in any way?" Victor turned to her, and Izzy saw something that shocked her, restrained tears in his eyes. "Why did you stay?" he asked. "Why didn't you leave when she arrived?" Izzy hesitated, trying to understand her own feelings. Because you asked, and because it seemed like you needed someone on your side." The simplicity of the answer struck Victor like lightning. In a world where everyone had ulterior motives, where every gesture was calculated, Izzy had stayed simply because he had asked, because she sensed that he needed support. "She's going to destroy me," he said, his voice breaking. 3 years, building everything again after she humiliated me, and now she's going to destroy me once and for all. Izzy got up, and in an impulse that surprised her, walked over to him. For the first time, she was the one who broke the invisible barriers between them. "She won't," she said with a conviction she didn't know where it came from. "We won't let her. We." The pronoun had escaped without her realizing it, but now it was too late to back down. Izzy raised her chin, finding courage in an unknown source. "Yes, we. She may have weapons, but she also has weaknesses, and we're going to find them." Victor stared at her for a long moment, seeing in her something he would never have expected to find, an ally willing to fight by his side, not for money or interest, but for something much rarer and more precious. When he reached out his hand to her, Izzy did not hesitate to take it. The grip was firm, a silent promise that they would face together whatever came next. Neither of them realized that, on the other side of the glass door, the floor secretary watched everything with interest, already planning how to use this information to her advantage. The 48 hours that followed transformed Victor and Izzy into conspirators, united by a desperate purpose. They spent the nights in the office, investigating every detail of Serena's past, looking for some loophole, some information that could neutralize her blackmail. It was during one of those late nights that everything changed irreversibly. Victor had ordered pizza, and they ate directly from the boxes on the conference table, surrounded by piles of documents, photographs, and notes. Izzy had taken off her shoes and tied her hair up haphazardly, completely abandoning the formal posture she maintained during office hours. Victor had loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, looking younger, more human. "I found something," Izzy said suddenly, holding up a document. Serena set up an offshore company in the Cayman Islands 3 months before she ended. The engagement. Look at the dates. Victor examined the papers, his mind processing the implications. "She was already planning to leave me," he murmured. The company was created to receive transfers from Pierre even before she dumped me. And there's more. Izzy pointed to a series of transactions. She received €2 million from him while she was still engaged to you. That constitutes marital fraud, at least morally. Victor looked up at her, impressed once again by her insight. How did you find this out? I called a friend who works in compliance at an international bank. I asked for a favor. Izzy blushed slightly. I said it was to protect my boss from blackmail. The word protect echoed in the silence of the office. Victor realized that she had risked her own professional reputation for him, had used her personal contacts to help him. It was a gesture of loyalty that went far beyond her obligations as an employee. Why are you doing this for me? He asked softly. Izzy hesitated, the words stuck in her throat. How to explain that seeing the vulnerability behind his impenetrable facade had awakened in her feelings that she didn't know how to name, how to admit that each shared moment made her heart race in a way she had never experienced. Because it's unfair, she said finally. You don't deserve to be destroyed by someone who just wants money. It's not just that, Victor said, getting up and walking over to her. There's more, isn't there? Izzy felt the air thin as he approached. She could feel the heat emanating from him, the masculine scent mixed with the aroma of the coffee they had drunk. When she raised her eyes, she found him just inches away, studying her face as if trying to decipher a mystery. Izzy, he said, his voice husky. What's happening between us? She knew that she should step away, maintain professional distance, remember who they were and the differences between their worlds. But when Victor raised his hand and gently touched her face, all reason disappeared. I don't know, she whispered. I do, he said, moving even closer. I've known since that day you took care of me. I know it's wrong, I know it's complicated, I know I should resist, but I can't. When he kissed her, it was with a tenderness that contrasted with the urgency of the moment. Izzy felt the world spin around her, all her senses awakened by this first intimate contact. The kiss was sweet, hesitant at first, then deeper when she responded, wrapping her arms around his neck. When they broke apart, they were both breathless. This can't happen, Izzy said, but her hands still rested on his chest. I know, Victor replied, kissing her forehead, but it already has. They spent the rest of the night working in a silence, charged with sexual tension, each accidental touch of hands, each exchanged glance fueling the flame that had been lit between them. At dawn, they had a plan. Victor would confront Serena with the evidence of her own fraud, forcing a stalemate. It wasn't a complete victory, but it could be enough to neutralize her blackmail. What they didn't expect was that their new intimacy wouldn't go unnoticed. Karen Miller, the secretary in the finance department, had worked at the company for 15 years. She had seen bosses come and go, scandals erupt and resolve, secret romances blossom and wither. And she had learned that information was power. Karen arrived early that morning, as she always did, and immediately noticed that something was different. The lights on the 50th floor had remained on all night. There were pizza boxes in the break room trash can, and the air was permeated with the tension she immediately recognized. When she saw Victor and Izzy getting out of the elevator together, she noticed the details that others would miss. Her hair slightly disheveled, his tie slightly crooked, the way they avoided looking directly at each other, as if they feared their secrets would be visible in their eyes. Karen smiled to herself. Information was power, and she had just discovered the most valuable information of her career. During the day, while Victor prepared for the confrontation with Serena, Karen made some discreet calls. She found out about the recent audit, about the nights that Victor and Izzy had spent working alone, about the subtle change in the dynamic between them. In the afternoon, when Victor was in his final meeting with Serena, a meeting that resulted in a tense stalemate, with both sides agreeing to a truce based on mutually assured destruction, Karen made her move. She called 3 people: the society, gossip editor of the biggest newspaper in New York, the chairman of the Ethics Committee of the Business Association to which Victor belonged, and a columnist specializing in corporate scandals. The same sentence was repeated in all three calls. I have information about an inappropriate relationship between CEO Victor Caldwell and his personal assistant. There is evidence of favoritism, nights working alone in the office, and a closeness that goes far beyond the professional. I think you would be interested. When Victor returned from his meeting with Serena, feeling exhausted but relieved to have neutralized the immediate threat, he found Izzy in his office with a panicked expression on her face. "Victor," she said, using his name for the first time, "we need to talk." She was holding a tablet, and on the screen shone the title of an article that was being finalized for publication the next day. Billionaire CEO and assistant, forbidden romance in the upper echelons of finance. The article included photos of them entering and leaving the building together, speculations about the time they spent alone, and anonymous quotes from employees concerned about corporate ethics. Victor sat down heavily in his armchair, realizing that he had escaped one blackmail only to fall into an even bigger trap. This wasn't an external threat that could be fought with evidence and lawyers. It was a scandal that would feed on every shared moment, every attempt at defense. "They're going to destroy us," Izzy said, her voice breaking. "They're going to destroy your reputation, your company, my career, everything." Victor looked up at her, seeing the fear and guilt etched on her face. She was blaming herself, he realized, taking responsibility for a situation that was out of both of their control. "No," he said, getting up and walking over to her. "They're going to try, but they won't succeed." But even as he spoke the words of courage, Victor knew that they faced an enemy far more dangerous than Serena. They faced society itself, with its prejudices, its judgments, and its insatiable thirst for scandals that destroyed the powerful. The phone rang, and the tense voice of the receptionist announced, "Mr. Caldwell, there's a crew from NBC News down here asking for a statement about your special relationship with your assistant, and there are 2 more networks on the way." The scandal exploded like a nuclear bomb the next morning. The headlines screamed from newspapers, news, websites, and social media with a veracity that Victor had never witnessed, even in his worst business nightmares. Billionaire CEO and the forbidden romance, favoritism and abuse of power in the executive suite. Humble assistant becomes Cinderella at shareholders' expense. What else is Victor Caldwell hiding? Investigation reveals pattern of questionable behavior. Victor arrived at the office at 5 in the morning, trying to escape the cameras that were already crowding the entrance of the building. But there was no escape. The security guards were forced to form a human cordon so that he could pass, while reporters shouted obscene questions about his private life and his helpless victim. Izzy wasn't so lucky. She got off the subway at the 59th Street station, as she always did, but this time she was greeted by a mob of journalists who had discovered her morning route. The cameras surrounded her like predators. The questions rained down like blows. "Izzy, is it true that you seduced your boss to get promotions? How much money did Victor Caldwell give you in exchange for sexual favors? Were you always a gold digger, or did that start after you found out how rich he was?" Izzy tried to protect herself with her bag, pushing away the cameras that were approaching her face. Her hands trembled, tears of humiliation ran down her cheeks, and she couldn't form words to defend herself. The shy assistant who had always avoided drawing attention was being devoured alive by the national media. A man grabbed her arm, trying to force her to look at his camera. "Come on, honey, we just want your side of the story. How much does he pay you per month besides your salary?" It was the last straw. Izzy managed to break free and ran, running, through the streets of Midtown Manhattan like a criminal on the run, pursued by a pack of journalists thirsty for blood. In the office, Victor watched the live images of Izzy being publicly humiliated, and every second was torture. He ordered the security guards to find her, but it was too late. She had disappeared into the streets of the city, probably seeking refuge at home. The phone didn't stop ringing. Furious shareholders, board members demanding his resignation, clients cancelling contracts, business partners distancing themselves, as if he were radioactive. In a matter of hours, his reputation built over decades was being publicly demolished. Edward Moretti, chairman of the board, arrived at the office at 9 in the morning with an expression that Victor knew well. It was the face of corporate betrayal, of the moment when allies turned into enemies to save their own skin. "Victor, this is unsustainable," Edward said without preamble. "The shares have fallen 20% since yesterday. We have international investors threatening to withdraw billions in funds. The company cannot survive this scandal. It's a consensual relationship between adults," Victor said, keeping his voice steady. "There's nothing illegal or unethical. It doesn't matter what it is, it matters what it looks like." Edward threw the newspapers onto the table. "It looks like abuse of power. It looks like you took advantage of a vulnerable employee. It looks like our company is run by a man without moral control." Victor leafed through the newspapers, feeling nausea rising in his stomach. They had turned Izzy into a caricature, the poor innocent seduced by the powerful boss. Her dignity, her intelligence, her silent strength, everything had been reduced to degrading cliches. "The board meets in an hour," Edward continued. "You have two options: resign voluntarily and maintain some dignity, or we face an impeachment process that will be even more destructive. And Izzy, she has already been fired for just cause, breach of trust and misconduct in the workplace." The words hit Victor like bullets. They had fired Izzy, destroyed her source of income, ruined her chances of getting another job. The woman who had risked everything to help him was paying the highest price. "You can't do that," Victor said, his voice trembling with anger. "We already have, and there's more. Our legal team has prepared a confidentiality agreement. She cannot talk about the relationship, about the company, about you. In exchange, she receives a silent severance package. But if she breaks the silence, she will be sued for defamation and slander." Victor stood up abruptly, the chair scraping. "You're blackmailing her to stay silent about a relationship that never officially existed." "We are protecting the interests of the company," Edward said coldly. "And yours too, although you don't seem to understand that." At that moment, Victor understood the extent of the trap. It didn't matter if he resigned or fought. It didn't matter if the relationship was real or imaginary. The machine of destruction had already been activated, and everyone it touched would be devoured. He tried to call Izzy dozens of times, but she didn't answer. He sent messages, emails, tried every possible means of communication. Absolute silence. Finally, at 4 in the afternoon, he managed to speak to Mrs. Fiorello, Izzy's mother. "Please, I need to talk to her," Victor pleaded. "My daughter is hospitalized," said the tired and resentful voice of the elderly woman. "She had a severe anxiety attack when she got home. The doctor said it was the stress, the public humiliation. She can't stop crying." Victor felt the world collapse around him. "Mrs. Fiorello, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" The woman's voice hardened. "That you seduced my innocent daughter, that you used her and then allowed her to be humiliated on national television, that because of you, she lost her job and will never be able to work again." "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that. Izzy told me everything. How you kissed her in the office, how you made her believe that there was something special between you. And when things got ugly, you abandoned her to save yourself. That's not true. I love her." The silence on the other end of the line lasted an eternity. "If you really loved her," said Mrs. Fiorello finally, "you would never have allowed this to happen to her. Don't ever try to contact us again. My daughter has suffered enough." The call ended. Victor was alone in his office, surrounded by the wreckage of his life. Through the windows, he could see the vans of the television networks. Parked on the street, the cameras pointed at the building like cannons waiting to fire. Edward returned at 5 o'clock with the resignation papers. "It's better this way, Victor, for everyone." Victor signed the documents with trembling hands. In a matter of minutes, he ceased to be the CEO of the company he had built, ceased to be the powerful man who inspired fear and respect. He was just another businessman fallen into disgrace. But the real pain didn't come from the loss of position or money. It came from the certainty that he had destroyed the life of the only person who truly loved him. Izzy was in a hospital, psychologically broken because of him, and he couldn't do anything to undo the harm he had caused. That night, Victor got drunk alone in his apartment, surrounded by the deafening silence of a life that had lost all meaning. Outside, the city continued to function, indifferent to the personal tragedy that had unfolded that day. In the hospital, Izzy remained sedated, fleeing in an induced sleep from the reality that had become unbearable. In her nightmares, cameras chased her through endless corridors. Cruel voices repeated the accusations, and she desperately searched for Victor in the darkness. But he never appeared to save her. The love that had blossomed between them had been trampled and destroyed by the relentless machine of public judgment. And in the silence of the night, both discovered that sometimes the price of loving someone can be the complete destruction of everything that one is. Not 2 weeks had passed since the public collapse of their lives, and Izzy had finally been discharged from the hospital. Mrs. Fiorello watched her with concern as she remained sitting on the porch of their apartment in Queens, staring blankly at the city skyline without really seeing it. Her daughter had lost weight, developed dark circles under her eyes, and spoke only as much as necessary to survive. "Izzy, you need to eat something," Mrs. Fiorello said, placing a plate with a sandwich next to her. "I'm not hungry, Mom. And you need to get out of the house. Staying here only makes things worse." Izzy finally looked at her mother, and Mrs. Fiorello saw a determination growing in her eyes that hadn't been there in recent days. "You're right. I need to get out. But, not to forget, to fight." That afternoon, Izzy did something she had never done in her life. She went into an expensive store on Fifth Avenue and bought an elegant pantsuit, high-heeled shoes, and a genuine leather bag. She used almost all the money from the severance package that the company had paid to buy her silence, but she didn't care. She had a plan. The next morning, she was standing in front of the building of the biggest newspaper in New York City, dressed as the executive she never was, but with the dignified posture she had always possessed. She asked to speak with Robert Mendez, the most respected investigative journalist in the country. "Mr. Mendez, my name is Izzy Fiorello. I believe you know me from the newspapers." Robert studied her with interest. He expected to find the fragile and victimized woman that the media had portrayed, but the person in front of him radiated a contained strength that impressed him. "I know your case. What can I do for you?" "I want to tell the truth. The real story, not the version they sold to the newspapers. You signed a confidentiality agreement, didn't you? Breaking that agreement can be costly." "It can cost everything I have," Izzy said, raising her chin. "But keeping silent is costing me my dignity, and that's worth more than any money." Robert took her to his office and recorded a 2-hour interview. Izzy told everything, how she had been the one to take care of Victor during his health crisis, how they worked together against Serena's blackmail, how the feeling had arisen naturally between them based on mutual respect and genuine admiration. There was never favoritism. There was never abuse of power, she said, her voice firm. Victor never used his position to pressure me. If there was any mistake, it was falling in love. But loving someone isn't a crime. And why are you breaking the silence now? Because I realize that my silence is being interpreted as guilt. Because while I hide, their version becomes absolute truth. And because she hesitated, feeling tears in her eyes, because maybe it's the only way to clear his name too. Robert published the interview the following Sunday with the headline, "The Truth Behind the Scandal, Izzy Fiorello Breaks the Silence." The repercussion was immediate and devastating for the company that had orchestrated the destruction of the couple. The interview revealed an articulate, intelligent, and courageous woman, completely different from the helpless victim they had painted. Social media exploded with support for Izzy. Hashtags like "Justice for Izzy" and "Love is not a crime" went viral. But the real earthquake came when Robert, inspired by Izzy's courage, decided to investigate more deeply. He discovered that the secretary, Karen Miller, had received $100,000 from an anonymous beneficiary 2 days before leaking the information to the press. Following the money trail, Robert discovered something even bigger. The transfer had been made by Serena Vanderbilt's consulting firm. She orchestrated everything, Robert explained to Izzy during a second meeting. When Victor neutralized the direct blackmail, she changed her strategy. She decided to destroy his reputation publicly, using your relationship as a weapon. Izzy felt a mixture of anger and relief. Anger at discovering the extent of the manipulation that had destroyed their lives. Relief at knowing that they had not been victims of coincidence or bad luck, but of a calculated and cruel plan. "What do we do now?" she asked. "Now, we gather the evidence. But it will take more than a journalist to face Serena Vanderbilt. She has money, influence, expensive lawyers. Izzy knew exactly who to look for. 2 weeks later, she was sitting in the office of the most prestigious law firm in New York City, before Dr. Samantha Hayes, one of the most feared criminal lawyers in the country. Samantha had accepted the case pro bono after reading Izzy's interview. "We have evidence of conspiracy, defamation, blackmail, and malicious interference in business," Samantha said, reviewing the documents. "Serena Vanderbilt underestimated one thing, the fury of an innocent woman who decided to fight. And Victor, does he know I'm doing this?" "No, and I suggest you keep it that way for now. If he knows, he may try to stop you, thinking he's protecting you. You need to be sure you want to continue. The road to justice will be long and brutal." Izzy thought about the life she had lost, the shattered career, the sleepless nights crying over the public humiliation. She thought about Victor, who, according to the news, lived reclusively, destroyed by guilt and disappointment. She thought about the true love she had found, and that had been stolen from her by greed and cruelty. "I'm absolutely sure." Meanwhile, in his penthouse on the Upper East Side, Victor lived like a ghost. He had lost weight, grown a scruffy beard, and spent his days drinking and blaming himself for everything that had happened. His friends had distanced themselves, his family avoided him, and he hadn't left his house in weeks. But that afternoon, when he opened his computer and saw Izzy's interview being shared millions of times, something awakened within him. She was fighting, alone, without resources, facing giants, but fighting for the truth and for the dignity of both of them. For the first time in weeks, Victor showered, shaved, and put on clean clothes. He didn't know how yet, but he was going to join her in the battle. He wouldn't allow the woman he loved to face alone the monsters that had destroyed their lives. The war for truth was just beginning, and this time, they were no longer alone. The American people, touched by Izzy's sincerity and outraged by the injustice, began to mobilize alongside them. Serena Vanderbilt, watching the news coverage from Paris, realized that she had severely underestimated her victims. The timid assistant and the defeated CEO had transformed into dangerous adversaries. The real battle was about to begin. The trial of Serena Vanderbilt began on a sunny morning in December, 6 months after the scandal had exploded. The New York Supreme Court was surrounded by journalists from around the world, onlookers and protesters carrying signs with phrases like "Justice for Izzy" and "Love wins." Victor arrived by taxi, wearing a simple but elegant suit. In recent months, he had transformed. The cold and distant man had given way to someone more human, more approachable. He had used part of his personal fortune to create a fund to support employees who were victims of workplace harassment, and he worked as an independent financial consultant, rebuilding his reputation step by step. But none of that mattered at that moment. His eyes scanned the crowd, searching for a specific face. Izzy was standing on the courthouse steps, talking to Dr. Samantha Hayes. She wore a navy blue pantsuit that highlighted her eyes, and her hair was loose, framing her face with a softness that he had forgotten. When she saw him, time seemed to stop. They hadn't spoken in 6 months. Throughout the investigation and trial preparation process, they had communicated only through their lawyers, each respecting the other's space to heal from the wounds left by the scandal. "Izzy," he said, approaching slowly. "Victor," she replied, and there was so much in the way she pronounced his name. Pain, longing, but also a new strength that he didn't know. "You look beautiful," he said sincerely. "You also look different. Better." They could have stood there forever, drinking each other in with their eyes, but Dr. Samantha interrupted them. "It's time to go in. Are you ready?" In the courtroom, Serena Vanderbilt was sitting at the defense table, impeccable as always, but there was something different in her posture. The arrogant confidence had been replaced by a poorly disguised tension. Next to her, a team of 5 expensive lawyers tried to look confident. The prosecutor began his presentation with the evidence that Robert Mendez and Samantha's team had collected. The bank transfers to Karen Miller, the phone recordings where Serena instructed the secretary on when and how to leak the information, emails detailing the plan to destroy Victor's reputation. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," said the prosecutor, "you will see that this was not a case of a misunderstood romance. It was a calculated and cruel attack against 2 innocent people, orchestrated by a woman driven by greed and revenge." When it was Izzy's turn to testify, she walked to the stand with the dignity of a queen. Her voice was clear and firm as she told her version of the events from the day she took care of Victor, during his crisis, to the moment they decided to fight Serena's initial blackmail together. "Our relationship was born of mutual respect and admiration," she said, looking directly at the jurors. "There was never favoritism or abuse. Victor always treated me as an equal, even when I hadn't yet learned to see myself that way." The defense attorney tried to discredit her, insinuating that she had seduced Victor for financial gain. But Izzy responded with a calmness that impressed everyone. "If my interest was money, Mr. Attorney, I would have accepted Serena's first offer to lie about Victor, or I would have sold my story to the tabloids for millions. Instead, I spent my savings to fight for the truth." When Victor took the stand, his statement was even more devastating. "Serena Vanderbilt has known me for a long time. She knew that destroying Izzy would be the most effective way to destroy me, because she knew that I loved her more than my own life. And she was right. Seeing the woman I love being publicly humiliated was worse than losing my company, my position, my fortune." He turned to Izzy, who was sitting in the front row. "Izzy taught me that there is something more valuable than power or money, the courage to be vulnerable, to love truly, to fight for what is right, even when everything is against you." The decisive moment came when Karen Miller, the former secretary, was called to testify. Under oath and in the face of irrefutable evidence, she confessed everything: how Serena had approached her, how they had planned the couple's destruction together, how she received money to spy on and leak information. "I didn't know it would come to this," Karen cried on the witness stand. "I thought it would just be gossip, something to teach the arrogant boss a lesson. I never imagined it would destroy 2 innocent lives." When the verdict was read, guilty of conspiracy, blackmail, defamation, and malicious interference in business, Serena Vanderbilt collapsed. The woman who had spent her life manipulating others was sentenced to 5 years in prison and ordered to pay millions in damages to Victor and Izzy. But for the 2 protagonists of this story, the real victory was not in the courtroom. It was outside when they finally stood alone after months of forced separation. "Izzy," Victor said, holding her hands, "I know I can't undo the pain I caused you. I know your life was turned upside down because of me." "Our cause," she corrected, softly. "We caused this together when we decided to fall in love, and together we will rebuild. Can you forgive me? I forgave you a long time ago. The question is, can you forgive yourself?" Victor kissed her then, right there on the courthouse steps, in front of the cameras of the world. But this time, the cameras captured not a scandal, but a love story that had survived the storm. 2 years later, Victor and Izzy were married in an intimate ceremony in the Hamptons, with only family and closest friends present. Mrs. Fiorello, whose health had improved dramatically after the financial stress, walked her daughter down the aisle. Victor had rebuilt his company, this time with Izzy as an equal partner, not as an employee. Together, they created an empire based not only on profits, but on ethical values and social responsibility. The company became a benchmark for a healthy work environment and gender equality. Izzy never completely abandoned her literary dreams. She wrote a book about her experience, half biography, half reflection on love, courage, and justice, that became an international bestseller. Part of the profits were donated to organizations that support women who are victims of workplace harassment. In his spare time, Victor returned to drawing. His home office was decorated with architectural designs of buildings that might never be built, but that existed as proof that it's never too late to rediscover lost dreams. One Sunday afternoon, 5 years after the trial, they were in their house in upstate New York, he drawing while she wrote on her laptop. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, painting everything with a warm, golden light. "Victor," said Izzy, closing her laptop, "do you regret anything?" He looked up from his drawings and gazed at her, hair gilded by the sunlight, eyes shining with contentment, a serenity that came from someone who had fought for her happiness and won. "I regret taking so long to realize that you were always right in front of me," he said. "But I don't regret the storm we faced. It made us stronger. And it taught us that true love isn't the one that avoids difficulties," added Izzy, "but the one that faces them side by side." Outside, the New York City continued its eternal dance of ambition and dreams, indifferent to the small human tragedies and triumphs. But inside that house in upstate New York, 2 souls who had met, lost each other, and found each other again silently celebrated the most precious victory of all: the love that survives any storm and comes out on the other side stronger and truer than ever. And if sometimes, on the clearest nights, they remembered the pain and humiliation they had suffered, it was only to appreciate even more the light that now illuminated their lives, a light that no one ever again would be able to extinguish.